Hello, I'm Dr. Aizaz from MedicoVisual.com, and in today's visual lecture we will talk about development or embryology of cerebellum. So previously in the first lecture of Rhombencephalon, in which we discussed the basic concepts of Rhombencephalon, we had discussed that how the pontine flexure develops. So this was the situation. Let's quickly watch the animation that before the formation of pontine flexure, this is the situation. Then what happens that this is, by the way, section specifically at the pons area, that what happens at the pons area as well as in the medulla, basically in the medulla, between the medulla and pons, in that area specifically. This is the roof plate here. This part is the roof plate. This roof plate widens up, or you can say it splays open like this, and this is the situation on the 3D model. Let's watch it again. So it splays open like this, and if I hide the outer covering, pia mater covering, this is the situation like this. So we had discussed these things already. Then we had also discussed that these are the blue colored one, these are the alar plate, and this red color one, they represent the basal plates. Now what happens that at the dorsolateral end of alar plates, the thickening appears, basically you can say extensions appear like this, and these lip-like extensions, these are basically called the rhombic lips, and of course they will be covered by the pia mater. If you want to see them on the 3D model, here is the 3D model. Of course the pia mater has been removed in this model. So let's watch the animation again. You can correlate the model as well as cross section in this diagram 3D model like this. So this is the situation. So you see this is the rhombic lip. Now rhombic lip near the mesencephalon, this is the mesencephalon here, this will form the midbrain. Near the mesencephalon, the rhombic lip, you can say they are quite close to each other. At the midline they are almost joined together, but as we go inferiorly or caudally, at the middle of the pontine flexure, you can see they are far apart from each other. This is the situation right now. So here is the cross section. This cross section is somewhat of, let's say, this area, right? So this is this cross section here. This cross section is shown here. So you can see that the rhombic lip, they are not joined together in the midline. So now what will happen that the rhombic lip in this area as well, they will come close to each other. For the right and left rhombic lips, they will grow, they will proliferate, and they will come close to each other like this, and ultimately they will meet in the midline here in this 3D model as well, not 3D model, in this cross section as well. Here you can also see that basically this was the situation, but they come close together and they meet in the midline. So on this 3D model as well, you should be very clear about this, that they meet in the midline. So this is the situation. Now as the rhombic lip, as they have met in the midline, now they have formed a plate like structure. You see they have formed this plate like structure. Now initially they were the rhombic lip, now the plate like structure is formed. These plates are basically single plate, actually it is now single plate. This plate is called cerebellar plate. Cerebellar plate. So first there was the rhombic lip, which developed from, rhombic lip is basically the dorsolateral extension of the alar plate, right? So these are the rhombic lip. They met in the midline to form the cerebellar plate. Now what will happen with the cerebellar plate, that basically the cerebellar plate will form two parts, this lateral part here, this lateral part as well, and then a midline part. So one midline part and two bilaterally, two lateral parts. So these are also called lateral cerebellar swelling and medial cerebellar swelling. One midline swelling, one medial cerebellar swelling, and two lateral cerebellar swellings. So these are going to form the cerebellum. Now let's see what happens with them. So Let's forget about the cross section. Now we will focus on this 3D model. So let's see what happens. Here you can see those swellings properly, somewhat here. So here you can see these swellings. These are the lateral swellings, lateral cerebellar swelling. Lateral, actually the swelling are basically only lateral swellings, but still some authors they insist to call the median one as swelling. This one they still call it swelling, medial swelling, but technically this is not a swelling. You can even see in diagrams in the textbooks, they do not, the medial one, it does not look like swelling. Of course lateral one is the swelling. So maybe that is why some authors they simply call that this is the medial part of developing cerebellum, or you can say medial part of primordial cerebellum, and these are the lateral parts of primordial cerebellum. Now the medial part, or medial swelling as they say, that will form the vermis, and lateral part it will form the cerebellar hemispheres like this. They will grow like this. And at the same time you can see that there is this transverse fissure or transverse groove is here. You can see, if you cannot, let me mark it here for you. This is this transverse groove that I am talking about. Now this transverse groove, it has divided this developing cerebellum or cerebellar plate. It has divided the cerebellar plate into two parts. This cranial part is also called extraventricular part, and this caudal part is called intraventricular part. Why it is called intraventricular? Because you can see it is going almost into the cavity of fourth ventricle. So scientists, embryologists, they like to call it intraventricular. Technically it is not intraventricular, as it is not going into, it is not going inside the actual cavity of fourth ventricle, but nonetheless it is called intraventricular part. Now intraventricular part, it will form the flocculonodular lobe, flocculonodular lobe of the cerebellum, and rest of the cerebellum, which is basically anterior and posterior lobes, rest of the cerebellum will be formed by the extraventricular part. Don't worry, I will show these things to you and it will become more clear in a minute. So you see, so ultimately they will grow like this, and now you can, I think, see it more clearly that this is the flocculonodular lobe. This part is called nodule. This is called nodule, and these lateral parts, these are called flocculus. And if you see them as a whole, they form a primitive part, as they say. It's the primitive part of flocculonodular lobe. It is the primitive part of the cerebellum. Why it is primitive part? Because phylogenetically it is present even in small animals, even in the fishes that is present. So that is why they say that evolutionary speaking, it is the most primitive and most basic part of cerebellum, which is present even in the lower animals, even in the fishes. But the humans and other animals, they also have anterior and posterior lobes of the cerebellum. And by the way, these lateral swellings, as they develop in textbooks, they say that they form dumbbell shaped swelling basically. So you see, they look like a dumbbell, but to me they do not look like a dumbbell. I don't know why. When I see this, I imagine something else. I imagine boobs. Maybe I have a wild imagination, but that's what I imagine. I'm sorry about that. They do not look like dumbbell to me, but anyhow, that's what they say in textbooks. So anyhow, this was the flocculonodular lobe. This is the anterior and posterior lobe. So, and by the way, this middle part, that is very important, that this middle part here that is just formed, medial part, this medial part of the cerebellum is called vermis, and then this lateral part, this huge and expanded lateral part, it is called, these are called basically cerebellar hemispheres, and basically they are also called lateral zones of cerebellum. Vermis, lateral zone of cerebellum, and between vermis and lateral zone some part here that is also called paravermis or paravermal zone or intermediate zone. What is this? This is called paravermis or intermediate zone, right? So we have vermis, we have paravermis or intermediate zone, and we have cerebral hemispheres. And as I've told you that these are anterior and posterior lobes. So where is the posterior lobe? Actually another transverse groove or transverse fissure develop like this. Let me show you again. This, right? So this one is called anterolateral fissure, and the other one that is lying a bit posteriorly and caudally, it is called posterolateral fissure. So we have two main fissures. Actually later we will see there are other small fissures, but two main bigger one, these are called anterolateral. It is also called primary fissure. Mainly rather it is called primary fissure. This is more common name of this fissure. It is called primary fissure, and this one is called, which separates the anterior and posterior lobes from the flocculonodular lobe. This is called posterolateral fissure. Right? So these are the basic fissures or basic grooves of the cerebellum. So you see, actually as the cerebellum develops, the cerebellum is relatively a huge sheet of tissue basically, and as it grows further, you can say that to increase the surface area of the cerebellum, it will form more of these folias or more of these fissures, right? So a structure like this will be formed, you see. Isn't it beautiful? So lots of fissures are formed, lots of small fissures are formed. And if we take a cut section, that let's suppose if we cut it from here like this, a cut section like this, then what we will see that cerebellum is like this, that it has lots of structures like this. And of course here is this larger fissure, which is the anterolateral fissure or primary fissure, then small fissures like this, and then another huge fissure like this, and then we have the flocculonodular lobe like this. So this is the structure of cerebellum. Now you can see that this is by the ventrolateral fissure, and this is, here is the posterolateral fissure. Now you can see that with these fissures formed, the cerebellum is divided into different lobes. So this is the anterior lobe up to here, this is the anterior lobe, and then this is the posterior lobe, and then this one is of course the flocculonodular lobe. Now some authors say that of course flocculonodular lobe is phylogenetically or evolutionary, it is the most primitive part of cerebellum. It is also called archicerebellum. Archi means it's primitive, archicerebellum. Now this is very clear and we know about this. But then there is another saying in some textbooks that the anterior cerebellum is the paleocerebellum. It is somewhat advanced in the evolutionary stage, and then the most advanced one is posterior lobe, which is neocerebellum. Neocerebellum is most advanced, and it is involved with it is related with the fine motor control and the coordination at very fine level. Flocculonodular lobe is related with balance and posture, basic posture. It is related with muscle tone, paleo-cerebellum, right? And this neocerebellum is related with fine movement and coordination, very fine type of coordination. Now this is the view that is mentioned in textbooks, but I do not agree with this. I am not alone, actually many physiologists, they do not agree with this. So this one is a bit debatable, or it is a controversial kind of classification that is still mentioned in textbooks. About the flocculonodular lobe, that is fine, I agree with this. But regarding the paleocerebellum, saying that the anterior lobe, it is of course the anterior lobe, saying that the anterior lobe is only involved with muscle tone and not with coordination, I think that is a bit far-fetched idea. I don't totally agree with this, but I won't go into this detail in this lecture. We will discuss these things when we will talk in detail about the physiology. But here I mentioned this classification for you because it is written in many textbooks, so they may ask in your exam. So you must know, and maybe you have to cram this. I know I am sorry about that, but this is what it is. Life is unfair sometime. So anyhow, we will discuss it in more detail in physiology. Let's focus on the embryology first. So we had discussed these things. What else is left? Yeah. So finally, it is not, the cerebellum is not just sitting on the on this on the roof of fourth ventricle. Actually, it becomes more, you can say, tightly adherent with this by the formation of this extension like thing. I don't know what they call it, but let's see the animation so that it becomes more clear. So you see that this part of, if I hide it for a second, you can see that this roof, it sort of invaginated into the cerebellum like this. So that is what is happening here, you see. And of course the arrangement of the cerebellum, it changed a little bit, you see. And if we make it slightly translucent, you can see that thing going inside the cerebellum, the roof plate going inside the cerebellum, right? Roof going inside the cerebellum. So perhaps, I'm not sure exactly about its function, but perhaps it helps in anchoring the cerebellum properly. So that was the basic idea of development of the cerebellum. Main thing that you must know, a single thing of cerebellum's embryology, that it develops from the dorsolateral extension of the alar plate, which is basically called rhombic lip. That is the single most thing that you must know about the development of cerebellum. That is quite often asked in your exams. So finally, if I put this pia mater outside here, I want to explain something important to you. That you see, if I first hide it, you see that here this part of you see here is this part of roof plate here, and here is also this part of roof plate. So these are the parts of roof plate to which the cerebellum is attached. Of course, they are covered with the pia mater, and these are basically called medullary vellum. This is the superior medullary vellum, and this is the inferior medullary vellum. Now if I put the pia mater here, of course you must know that the medullary vellum, it is covered with pia mater, right? So it is made up of roof plate covered with the pia mater, right? So this is superior medullary vellum, this is inferior medullary vellum. Some nerve fibers, or you can say some white matter tracts, are there in this area that we will discuss in the neuroanatomy. So this was about the development of cerebellum. In the next lecture we will talk about the histogenesis of cerebellum. So this is relatively smaller lecture because I have developed some mouth ulcers, I mean aphthous ulcers in my mouth, especially on the tongue, so it's a bit hard for me to speak. So this lecture will be a bit smaller. In the next lecture we will discuss the detail of histogenesis of cerebellum, and along with that I will also describe partially, not in detail, the basic physiology. We will discuss the basic physiology of cerebellum to understand the circuitry of cerebellum that develops during the histogenic process. So that's all about today's lecture. Thank you so much for watching this video. Have a great day. Goodbye.